Do we really have a soul? Or is that just a comforting illusion, something our brain invented to make sense of being alive? Science is now peeling back the layers of this ancient mystery. And what it's uncovering is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. A brain tumor can rewrite your personality. A pill can reshape your thoughts. If the core of who we are can be altered so easily, then what does that say about the soul? Psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience all point toward the same place: the neural networks of the brain, where consciousness, identity, and even emotion seem to emerge from electrical impulses and chemical reactions. But is that all we are? Is the soul just electricity dancing in flesh? Or is there something science still can't measure, something beyond? This question, what is the soul, has haunted human thought for millennia. Even the word psychology once meant the science of the soul, born from the Greek psyche and logos. But over time, the discipline distanced itself from what it couldn't observe, shifting its focus from metaphysics to measurable behavior. In 1879, Wilhelm Wundt founded the first experimental psychology lab. His mission wasn't to find the soul, but to chart the mind's mechanics. And so, as science advanced, the soul slipped into the shadows. In this episode of Soul and Science, we set belief aside and follow the evidence to see how modern psychology and psychiatry grapple with this age-old question. Join us as we navigate the unseen corridors of consciousness, memory, and the human mind. The mind-brain problem, a modern neuroscientific perspective. Today, what we know about the brain and the mind sheds new light on the historical understanding of the soul. Modern neuroscience explains our mental experiences and consciousness as products of the brain's electrochemical activity. Techniques like functional EEG have begun to show that our thoughts, emotions, and even what might be called mystical or spiritual experiences correspond to specific regions of brain activity. Renowned neuroscientist Antonio Damasio suggests that our emotions and sense of self are the result of complex neural mappings. The brain constantly monitors and represents the internal states of the body through a vast mapping process. And through this, we come to experience a sense of self. According to Damasio, consciousness and identity emerge entirely from these biological processes. But that doesn't mean the soul, in its traditional sense, is being dismissed. Rather, it implies that its physical basis is being explored. On the other hand, Nobel Prize-winning biologist Francis Crick offered an even more striking explanation. In what is known as the astonishing hypothesis, Crick stated, "You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules." In other words, even the spiritual qualities we attribute to ourselves may simply be the product of physical processes within the brain. This view presents a radical scientific interpretation that reduces the concept of the soul entirely to brain function. Of course, most modern scientists agree that consciousness and the mind are directly related to brain activity. Even our so-called subjective experiences, our feelings and thoughts, are seen as the result of interactions between brain cells. This brain-centered approach grounds the origin of our minds in matter, and in doing so, questions the necessity of an independent soul as traditionally conceived. But this raises a crucial question. Can these scientific explanations fully replace the traditional belief in the soul? Or does the soul persist as a phenomenon outside the boundaries of the scientific paradigm? The role of the soul in the history of psychology, from the study of the psyche to behaviorism. When the science of psychology first emerged, its focus was directly on the soul, or the mind. Even after the work of Wilhelm Wundt in the late 19th century, many psychologists continued to concentrate on studying mental processes. However, in the early 20th century, a powerful movement arose: behaviorism. Behaviorists argued that in order for psychology to be considered a true science, it had to focus solely on observable behavior. In his famous 1913 paper, John Watson declared that psychology should abandon vague concepts like consciousness, mind, or soul, and instead focus on stimulus-response relationships, in other words, behavior. From this perspective, the mind was considered a black box, something unknowable from the inside, and therefore not subject to scientific investigation. Psychologists like B.F. Skinner, who followed a similar path, also insisted that what happens inside the human mind is scientifically irrelevant. What matters is the measurable response to a given stimulus. In doing so, they pushed the concept of the soul outside the boundaries of psychology. Behaviorism dominated the field for decades, and inner experiences such as the soul or consciousness were largely excluded from scientific discourse. However, starting in the 1950s, the cognitive psychology revolution brought mental processes back into focus. Cognitive theorists began to view the human mind as an information processing system, functioning much like a computer. They started to study areas such as perception, memory, language, and problem-solving. Yet even during this transformation, the term soul was not reintroduced. Instead, more operational concepts like mind, memory, or consciousness were preferred. In other words, modern psychology continued to avoid making the very concept it was named after, the psyche or soul, a direct subject of scientific investigation. Interestingly, a paradox remains. In everyday language and clinical practice, expressions like mental health or spiritual disorder are still widely used. While psychology and psychiatry continue to use the word soul in ways the general public can relate to, what they actually refer to is mental health or psychological functioning. So, does this linguistic habit mean that the soul is now merely a symbolic term? Or could it still point to something we have not yet been able to define scientifically? If you found this documentary insightful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel to support our work. The concept of mental health and the mind-body relationship. Today, the term mental health is used to describe a state of emotional and psychological well-being. Conditions such as depression, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia are commonly referred to in everyday language as spiritual or mental disorders. However, modern psychiatry views these conditions as disorders of the brain. For instance, depression is explained by imbalances in specific neurotransmitters in the brain. In schizophrenia, genetic and neurochemical factors play a role. And in anxiety disorders, hyperreactivity in certain brain structures is often discussed. In medical terminology, it's not the soul that becomes ill. It's the disruptions in the functioning of the brain that are at issue. This situation brings up an important philosophical and scientific issue: the mind-body problem, also known as the psychophysical dilemma. If the soul is a separate and abstract entity, independent from the body, then how can physical changes affect it so profoundly? For example, a person who suffers a severe brain injury can experience a complete transformation in character and behavior. In cases of memory loss, individuals may forget their past and feel as if they've been reborn. Some psychiatric disorders can even fracture one's core sense of self. If our soul were truly independent from our body, a stable, unchanging essence, shouldn't it remain unaffected by such changes? This contradiction highlights the clash between the traditional concept of the soul and modern scientific findings. In severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia, a person's thought processes and perception of reality can become dramatically distorted. Some individuals with schizophrenia describe feeling empty inside, as if they have lost their soul. In dementia, progressive memory loss and changes in personality can lead loved ones to say, "That's not the same person anymore." Examples like these raise profound questions about how deeply the soul might be connected to the body. In modern psychiatry, the approach to this issue is generally pragmatic. The priority is to understand and treat mental illness at the level of the brain. Antidepressants or antipsychotic medications can alter brain chemistry, improving a person's emotional and cognitive state. But if a pill can change our thoughts, emotions, and even behavior, then where does that leave the concept of the soul? At this point, several different perspectives emerge. The neurobiological approach. Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist Eric Kandel stated, "All mental processes are, in fact, brain processes. Therefore, all mental disorders are disorders of the brain." He described schizophrenia as a disease just like pneumonia, arguing that viewing it as a brain disorder helps reduce the stigma surrounding it. This perspective treats the soul not as a separate entity, but as a reflection of the brain's functional state. If a condition can be treated, and a person improved, by adjusting brain chemistry, then, according to this view, there is no need to invoke a separate soul. Indeed, the idea that every mental disorder has a neural correlate in the brain is the dominant belief in contemporary psychiatry. The dualist approach. In contrast, some thinkers who follow the tradition of Cartesian dualism argue that the soul and body are separate, yet interact with one another. From this perspective, brain damage or disease does not alter the nature of the soul. It merely harms the instrument through which the soul expresses itself, the brain. As the common analogy goes, a broken instrument can impair a musician's performance, but it doesn't change the musician. According to this view, our spiritual essence remains intact. But when the tool we call the brain malfunctions, the soul loses its ability to manifest itself in the world. For example, a person who suffers a severe brain injury does not have a damaged soul, but the personality that the soul expresses through the brain may indeed change. The monist approach. Following the path of philosophers like Baruch Spinoza, the monist perspective proposes that the mental and the physical are simply two aspects of the same underlying reality. In this view, spiritual and bodily processes are inseparable. They form a unified whole. The soul is not a ghost inside the body. It is the subjective experience of the brain and body in action. Mental illness, then, is a disturbance within this singular reality, a condition that is both biological and psychological in nature. Many researchers in modern science also embrace this holistic approach, one that refuses to separate the mind from the brain. Setting aside these differing perspectives, perhaps the most striking insights into the relationship between the brain and the soul come from real-life case studies. One of the most famous in history is the case of Phineas Gage. In 1848, during a railroad construction accident, a metal rod was driven through Gage's skull. Amazingly, he survived. But his personality changed dramatically. Those who knew him noticed that the Gage who returned home was not the same man they had once known. Once calm and respectable, he had become aggressive, impulsive, and emotionally unstable. Despite retaining much of his memory and intelligence, it was as if he had become an entirely different person. This dramatic shift revealed that physical damage to the brain could alter a person's sense of self. If Gage had a soul, how consistent was it between the gentle Gage before the accident and the combative Gage after? Similarly, in advanced cases of dementia, when past memories fade and personality unravels, it becomes increasingly difficult to claim that the person's soul remains unchanged. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, is another extreme example that challenges the concept of the soul. In this condition, more than one identity, known as an alter, emerges, seemingly suggesting multiple souls within a single body. What's more, scientific studies have shown that these different identities can exhibit measurable physiological differences. An individual's alters may differ in things like heart rate, blood pressure, and even vision. For instance, one alter might be nearsighted and need glasses, while another sees perfectly fine. One may have allergies, while another shows no allergic reactions at all. These observations raise an unsettling question. If our soul is supposed to be a unified, indivisible essence, can it truly be fragmented? In psychiatry, dissociative identity disorder is explained as the mind's response to severe trauma, an adaptive splitting of identity. Still, these cases highlight just how fluid and fragile our sense of personal identity, and by extension, our understanding of the soul can be. Consciousness, self, and memory, the mental projection of the soul. As we attempt to understand the concept of the soul through the lens of modern science, three key elements consistently emerge: consciousness, self, and memory. The human experience of being a self, a subjective sense of I, has long been considered one of the strongest arguments for the existence of the soul. After all, each of us feels as though we possess a constant, unchanging identity within. But how does science explain this sense of self? Contemporary neuroscience and the philosophy of mind suggest that the feeling of identity is actually a process created by the brain. American philosopher Daniel Dennett, in his famous book Consciousness Explained, describes the self as a kind of storyteller, a narrative constructed by the brain. According to him, the mind is made up of countless processes running in parallel. And in order to organize this chaotic data, we create a story with ourselves at the center. Dennett argues that what we call the self is like a center of gravity in physics, an abstract point of reference, not a concrete and unchanging entity. In essence, the self is a fiction, a useful illusion generated by the brain. Similarly, German philosopher and neuroscientist Thomas Metzinger, in his book The Ego Tunnel, emphasizes that our experience of self is a model constructed by the brain. According to Metzinger, the human brain so masterfully simulates the external world and the body that we come to believe there is a subject, a self inside the simulation. In truth, there is no fixed or permanent soul. The brain continuously weaves together a stream of experiences into a coherent story. And the main character of that story is what we call me. Some findings in modern science also support these views. For instance, neurological experiments show that our sense of body and self can be easily deceived. In studies like the mirror box experiment, the rubber hand illusion, or virtual reality body swap scenarios, people can lose their sense of bodily boundaries in just a few minutes, and even perceive themselves as being outside their own bodies. These kinds of experiments demonstrate just how constructed and fragile our sense of self truly is. In other words, what we call the soul or the self may be nothing more than an integrated perception. One that can disappear, even if only temporarily, when the brain's signals are manipulated. Memory is a critical factor in this debate. Our personal identity is largely shaped by our memories and life narrative. But when someone experiences severe memory loss, losing all connection to their past, what remains? Does a person who has lost their memory still retain their soul? In cases of profound amnesia, patients may forget their past entirely, their loved ones, their life history, even their own names. And when they can no longer form new memories, they become trapped in an eternal present, living only in the moment, disconnected from any lasting sense of self. The famous case of Clive Wearing involved a musician who, due to a brain infection, was left with only a few seconds of short-term memory. Each time he awoke, he could not recall the previous moment. And when he saw his wife, he would light up with joy, as if seeing her for the first time in years. Wearing could still play the piano, his reflexive abilities remained intact. But without a past, it was impossible to build a sense of self. His condition vividly illustrates the role that memory plays in shaping our understanding of personality and the soul. In fact, some amnesia patients report feeling as though they have been reborn after losing their past memories. Memory loss reveals, sometimes painfully, just how deeply our sense of identity is tied to what we remember. When all of these findings are brought together, modern psychology begins to reduce the traditional concept of the soul to a single question. Could what we call the soul be a holistic sensation, born from the brain's complex activity? Perhaps, they say, instead of searching for the soul, we should focus on understanding the physiological mechanisms that give rise to selfhood, consciousness, and emotion. Science has already explained many phenomena that once belonged solely to the realm of the soul. And yet, one mystery remains unresolved: the miracle of our own subjective experience. The astonishing fact that we are aware of our very existence. Transpersonal psychology, transcendent experiences, and the soul. While mainstream psychology often excludes the concept of the soul, certain subfields, like transpersonal psychology, continue to explore spiritual and mystical experiences as valid subjects of study. Founded in the 1960s by pioneering psychologists such as Abraham Maslow and Stanislav Grof, transpersonal psychology aims to understand consciousness and human experience, not only within the boundaries of the individual ego, but also beyond those boundaries, into transcendent or transpersonal dimensions. Practices and phenomena such as meditation, mystical states, peak experiences, and even visionary episodes triggered by certain psychedelic substances fall within the scope of this approach. Transpersonal psychology also draws inspiration from Eastern philosophies and ancient spiritual traditions. Maslow's extension of his concept of self-actualization into a stage beyond the self was a direct reference to the mystical dimensions of human consciousness. Grof, on the other hand, reported that during therapeutic sessions involving psychedelic substances like LSD, participants often experienced a sense of transcending the boundaries of the self and becoming one with the universe. In recent years, this line of inquiry has seen a revival. Psychedelic research is once again being conducted at respected universities around the world. In a controlled study conducted at Johns Hopkins University in 2016, the hallucinogenic substance psilocybin was shown to significantly reduce death anxiety in patients with advanced cancer. A single dose of the compound led to months of lasting inner peace and a renewed sense of meaning and purpose in life. Many participants described the experience as a form of spiritual awakening. Findings like these do not seek to reject the concept of the soul, but rather aim to reinterpret it through a scientific lens. Transpersonal psychologists do not view the soul as merely individual consciousness. They tend to regard it as a phenomenon linked to universal consciousness. Naturally, such approaches are met with caution by the mainstream, and often criticized for lacking scientific verifiability. Still, attempting to bridge the mystical experiences described for centuries with modern psychology offers a different path toward understanding the soul. Perhaps one day, science will reach a point where even spiritual experiences can be explained in neuroscientific terms. For now, transpersonal psychology functions like an experimental laboratory, one that seeks to build a bridge between science and the spiritual quest. For example, contemporary neuropsychology and philosophy show that there is no fixed sense of self in humans, that the feeling of identity is continuously constructed by the brain. This closely parallels what Buddhists have said for centuries: there is no permanent essence. Modern psychology has increasingly turned toward an East-West synthesis, adopting practices like mindfulness or conscious awareness from Eastern traditions. Mindfulness-based stress reduction and therapy techniques use ancient meditation practices within a completely secular and scientific framework, transforming spiritual experiences into measurable outcomes. For instance, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, is now recognized as an effective method for preventing the relapse of depression. In this way, meditation, once a spiritual discipline, has become a psychological tool. This, in a way, can be seen as a subtle reintegration of the soul into modern science. Although the changes brought about by meditation are often explained through neuroplasticity, as the brain's ability to reshape itself, at its core, the act of gaining mastery over one's own mind can still be interpreted as a spiritual experience. In short, while Eastern and Western traditions have historically differed in their views on the soul and the self, a dialogue between the two has begun to take shape in recent years. Scientists now hold joint panels with Buddhist monks who claim the self is an illusion, and neuroscientists scan the brains of long-term meditators to better understand altered states of consciousness. These kinds of holistic approaches don't reject the concept of the soul outright. They carry the potential to reinterpret it and integrate it into scientific thought. Neurotechnology and the soul: questions for the future. The dizzying pace of technological advancement is raising entirely new questions about the mind and the soul. Progress in brain, computer interfaces, artificial intelligence, and neuroprosthetics has brought forth the idea that one day, the human mind could be uploaded into a digital environment. Transhumanist thinkers suggest that a person's entire consciousness could be transferred to a computer, allowing the mind or even the soul to live on, even after the body has died. But if such a thing were possible, would the uploaded consciousness truly be our soul, or merely a copy of the brain? Let's imagine a scenario. In the future, we successfully copy all the synaptic connections, memories, and personality traits from our brain into a digital environment, and transfer them into an artificial body. This digital mind now holds all of our memories, and responds just like we would. Could we call it me? Or would our soul vanish with the death of our biological body? This is not just a plot from a science fiction film. It's a serious philosophical question emerging directly from advancements in neurotechnology. Likewise, artificial intelligence systems are becoming increasingly complex, to the point where they may soon exhibit behaviors resembling consciousness. If an AI claimed to have self-awareness, would we attribute a soul to it? If consciousness can arise in something other than a human brain, how would that reshape our entire understanding of the soul? Right now, there are no definitive answers to these questions. But one thing is certain: as our control over the brain increases, our concept of selfhood will inevitably evolve. In the future, people may gain the ability to back up their minds, merge thoughts, or adjust emotional states electronically. If that happens, we'll be having very different conversations about the nature of the soul. Will the soul become something that can be described through digital data? Or will it always remain a transcendent mystery that defies material explanation? Only time will tell. The soul as a paradox. As modern psychology and neuroscience continue to explore the depths of the human mind, The traditional concept of the soul seems to have faded from scientific discourse. And yet, the irony is this. Terms like mental health and spiritual needs remain deeply embedded in our everyday language. Perhaps the soul endures as a paradox at the intersection of science and philosophy, something we cannot entirely exclude from scientific thought, yet cannot fully prove or grasp in material terms either. From a scientific perspective, the traditional definition of the soul, as an immaterial, eternal essence, remains extremely difficult to investigate. Science cannot make definitive claims about what it cannot measure. That's why psychology, rather than directly answering the question, "Does the soul exist?" has chosen instead to focus on explaining mental processes. But this approach does not fully extinguish humanity's inner search for meaning. We want to believe that we are more than just neurons and synapses. Concepts like art, literature, morality, and spirituality are still deeply associated with the idea of the soul. Perhaps the soul is the name we give to a complex phenomenon that science has yet to fully understand. Or maybe it's a metaphor, born from the unanswered questions surrounding our own existence. As modern science progresses, our way of defining the soul will likely evolve. As we uncover the nature of consciousness, the territory once attributed to the soul may shrink, or be redefined entirely. But no matter how far we advance, some questions will likely remain at the heart of what it means to be human. In the end, the relationship between the soul and modern psychology is dynamic and continually evolving. For now, the scientific consensus holds that our personality and consciousness are rooted in the brain. But that doesn't render the soul meaningless. It simply places it on a different plane. Does the soul truly exist? Is it immortal? We may not have reached a definitive answer. But perhaps the true significance lies in the question itself, because it invites us to explore the depths of the human mind and heart. Science has illuminated many things that were once shrouded in the mystery of the soul. And yet, there remains something we still can't fully explain: the profound and personal experience of being. Perhaps the soul is something still waiting to be discovered. Or maybe, it has always been there, simply beyond the reach of our current scientific language. This uncertainty, like the deep feeling we get when we gaze up at the night sky, will continue to inspire us to wonder and to seek. With this balanced perspective on the soul, modern psychology teaches us one essential truth: the being we call me is a miracle, formed by the intricate interaction of a magnificent brain and its environment. You can see this miracle as a symphony of neurons, or as the manifestation of a divine soul. Either way, it's impossible not to feel awe in the face of the profound mystery that is the human mind. If you found this documentary insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking the video to support our work. We'll see you in the next documentary.